Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. Today's guest, a guy by the name of Fabian Calvo. He owns the NoteHouse.us. They sell $100 million in distressed debt and properties a year for the last couple of years. He also has FabianForLiberty.com, a radio show. Hey, Fabian. Glad you could make it on USAWatchdog.com.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, let's talk about your business. I mean, $100 million in real estate-owned property and debt. That's quite a business. You're on the front lines of the mortgage crisis that basically sunk the country in 2008. Everything getting cleaned up? Everything coming along just fine? Or is the country still being ripped off?
Yeah, well, I mean, the country is definitely being ripped off, and it's nowhere near fine. In fact, I believe we haven't even scratched the surface of being at the bottom of the housing market. I have to say that on any given month, my firm will probably review anywhere between $10 and $25 million in distressed debt. Now, this isn't debt we actually buy and resell. It's debt we just review, and whether or not we buy it or not is a different story. But it shows you the volume that's still out there. And you know, I know we're going to get into this a little bit more, but I mean, the shenanigans happening by these banks and the fraud involved with not having proper chain of title is just it is such a huge structural failure of the mortgage and just real estate bubble that we're still feeling the after effects and will, I believe, for at least another decade.
You said that we're nowhere near scratching the surface of a bottom. And I ask this to people all the time. What's going to happen when interest rates go back to 7%? And I'll ask that to you. What's going to happen when interest rates go back to 7%?
Well, it's going to collapse the multi-bubble economy, starting with the U.S. dollar. But if you want to just stick with real estate, I mean, I'm an advocate of real estate, certain in geographical areas, certain types of real estate. I think there's money to be made there. I'm proof of it. My firm is. And so, but again, it's like anything else, right? People can lose their shirt if they don't know what they're doing. But when interest rates go up, values will continue to go down. And the borrowers that have had these adjustable rates that have been modified short term, they won't be able to come through with those modifications. They'll be absolutely wiped out. But not only will it just wipe out the housing bubble and the real estate bubble, the bond market, the dollar won't be able to finance our government debt bubble. That will blow up. The dollar bubble will blow up. So higher interest rates, which will come. They can't have it at zero forever because it'll it'll end up in a really bad way, that will happen anyways. But, you know, it's going to be really, the outcome will be very, very bad. There's no doubt.
You have your FabianForLiberty.com. I love your channel. I mean, I think you are the face of the new journalism, the new watchdog, as it were. People that's so upset and angry about what's going on that they start their own channel. You had a bad run-in with your failed run for the Florida State House. And that, one of the newspapers down there, which I read the story, called you a slumlord. Well, actually, they said, some call you a slumlord. Listen, I used to work in that market. I worked at WTSP. I would have never done a story like that. They didn't have any health code violations. They didn't have any building code violations. They had a couple of disgruntled employees. And this is what they went on to basically throw tar all over you?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned it. I'm glad you bring it up because anyone who runs for public office that has any real estate holdings will, if they're not the approved candidate by the establishment or by the left-wing media, they will basically that's what they'll say about you. Their character assassinate you. And it was just so insightful, Greg, to how dire our election process is. If you run for public office, if you're not part of the establishment, they won't try to go after you based on the issues and what you believe in. They'll literally try to character assassinate you. And anyone who's run for office anywhere knows exactly what I'm talking about. But, I mean, look, the story was total lies. I contacted the editor with all the documentation, all the backup, proving that all the stories were, everything they said was lies, and his answer to me was they were going to stick with the story in spite of many of the things you just mentioned, my company having an A rating with the Better Business Bureau and all these other things. So the real sad thing and the problem with our whole constitutional republic is the fact that the candidates with the most money, the person who goes out and has most multinational corporations or just corporations financing their campaign. In my example, the guy I ran with was in close with the Bush family, and Jeb Bush and George Bush. Multinational corporations were actually financing the campaign of a guy who ran for the state house in Florida, and not to mention all the other corporations that funneled money, banking institutions, and they literally have a stranglehold on our democracy, on our republic, and unless that changes with the movement of the people, Greg, we're in real jeopardy. Which again, we talked yesterday in the pre-interview. I told you this is all part and parcel of the end game.
And the end game, you're on the $100 million in physical property and banknotes at your company, the notehouse.us. You're on the front lines of this. What do you think the end game is?
Well, we have such systemic problems our structural problems with our economy. I mentioned a little bit earlier the multi-bubble economies, the fraud, waste, and abuse at the highest levels. So you go back in history and you look at any empire, right? The Ottoman Empire, the Habsburg Empire, the Roman Empire, the French monarchy that was toppled by the French Revolution. All of these pretty much had the same thing. Astronomically high inflation. At the very end, the people, the elite at the very, very top, the point half of the 1%, let's say, they're stealing from the treasury, they're looting the treasury, the debt's put on the people, via high inflation, in food prices, gas prices, everything else. And then there's systemic fraud, and corruption. And that's where we're at today. Just look at our government, just look at our Wall Street, just look at the finances. That to me is all a sign of the end game.
William Black, professor of economics and former bank regulator and professor of law, said that, in his day they had, 1,000 financial elites, not clerks, be prosecuted, and, not a single financial elite prosecuted this time. That backs up your story about rampant fraud and crime. And, this is 70 times bigger. And not a single question in the debates about any kind of, you're going to put people in jail for fraud. And I think the economy can't grow for a couple of reasons. One, you can't grow in this underpinning of fraud and wrongdoing. You could do whatever you want to do and nobody goes to jail. But I'm going to come back to the systemic problem with real estate, because that's your wheelhouse. And you're talking about all these share loss agreements that the FDIC puts out. Is that a good deal for the taxpayer?
No, I think actually, and I mentioned this to you yesterday, if the American people knew, they're upset about the bank bailouts. But if they knew about the backdoor bailouts that continues to happen at billions of dollars, literally a month, on top of the $85 billion that Bernanke is just creating out of thin air, again, the people paying for all this via the inflation tax, which is, again, the most sinister tax there is, Greg. But the loss share agreement basically gives banks that take over the big banks, that take over the local banks, the banks that fail. For example, let's say they take over a property that has a $100,000 loan, and that loan, let's say that property is worth $50,000. Well, let's say that a homeowner is pushed into short selling his home for $60,000 and the bank approves it. So the bank's going to get the $60,000 from the short sale. Now keep in mind, they bought this $100,000 loan. They bought it for probably 20 cents on the dollar. So let's say they're into it for $20,000. So they just made $40,000 between what they paid for it and what they got in the short sale. Now, on top of that, with the FDIC loss share agreement, Greg, the FDIC will pay this bank 80% of the original loan value. So they got 60. So on top of that, they'll get another $20,000, which is 80% of the 100, $80,000. So they're making the banks. It's important for people to realize the banks are profiting from the short sales, from the foreclosures, and just look around even though foreclosures have been down in this last quarter, they were down because we're in an election cycle. And in fact, I don't have proof of this, but I see this a lot. Banks dropping foreclosure cases ahead of the election, so those numbers go back. So I think, again, like all government numbers, they're all rigged. Banks purposely drop the foreclosure suits. And those will be refiled after the election. After the election, mark my words, there will be massive default and massive foreclosures that will be filed in the housing sector.
What a great prediction. That's a good one. That's a headline. The other thing that I kind of wanted to bring up is more about your kind of citizen journalism. Are you well received by the Republicans and Democrats alike, or not?
Well, I'd say I'm well received by people that have gotten past the two-party system, this narrative that you're either going to be Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. I'm about truth and where that takes me. I'm about supporting the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and our constitutional republic. Now, if there's a liberal that believes in those principles but may have some different philosophical thoughts on social issues, whatever it may be, so be it. I'll work with that person to restore the constitutional republic. But I think what you're seeing more and more of, and still in a landscape of the majority of Americans asleep to really what's going on. And what I mean by that is, again, you have a presidential debate that's supposed to be about the economy. They don't mention Bernanke, derivatives, the repudiation of the dollar and bilateral trade agreements. They're not talking about any of the real economic problems. I think only a good portion of Americans are waking up, realizing that the Republicans and Democrats are one and the same, playing by the same playbook, and they're screwing over the American people. Hopefully, we have a mass awakening where we end up having putting these bankers on trial, where we end up putting these criminal politicians on trial. I think, Greg, that's going to happen. It's like Austrian School of Economics. You have to flush out the malinvestment in order to get the economy working again. Well, to rework the constitutional republic, you have to flush out the criminals that have hijacked it.
Do you think, speaking about flushing out, you talked about how there's going to be a surge of bankruptcies, and this goes along with your line of flushing out. You think we're going to have a big flush at the end of this year, beginning of 2013? You think we're going to have some kind of another calamity in real estate, and thus a calamity in bonds and dollar and interest rates? Do you think we're headed for another collapse?
Yeah, there's no question. The two places that I'm looking specifically for another financial shock, which will be another financial panic, I think the next one will make 2008 simply look like a dress rehearsal. That will be either the Chinese government coming out with some kind of official statement on their gold holdings and then basically saying we want to internationalize the yuan, which they've already begun to do that, at a faster rate and perhaps even make it an alternative to the dollar. This next collapse, this next financial calamity will center around the repudiation of the dollar as the world reserve currency. That will mean gas prices in America, food prices in America, doubling and tripling, social unrest, civil unrest in America. So that's number one.
Let me interrupt here just for a minute. What happens to real estate prices?
Real estate prices will continue to go down depending on the markets. I mean, certain high-end markets, you're seeing a lot of European money, and a lot of wealthy people here will put their money into it. Certain asset classes of real estate, what I mean by that, lower-end rental properties, some of those may do well in different markets because people with cash, Greg, won't know where to put their money. So they'll either put it into that low-end real estate that they can either rent or barter with people, or they'll go into gold and silver, hard assets. And you're seeing that already. I mean, billion-dollar funds, billion-dollar hedge funds. I'm seeing it here in Tampa, in Los Angeles, where I spend a lot of time. A lot of multi-billion-dollar funds that are really allocating a lot of their money into rental real estate or into tangible assets, farmland, gold, silver, things of that nature.
And what's the other component of the collapse? Before I interrupt you, sorry. What's the other component? The second thing you said about the collapse that's coming.
Yeah, well, the first one is centers around the dollar. The second thing centers around the debt level. I mean, the debt level basically will, our creditors are at some point going to reject the U.S. Treasuries. They're just not going to finance it anymore. And, just take a look at last year. You had the Federal Reserve buying 61% of all U.S. Treasuries, of buying all of our debt. 61%. That should be leading every story nationwide. Instead, it's not. In fact, they're ignoring it on purpose. That should have been mentioned in the debate, but of course they never will. $85
billion a month is more than $1 trillion a year, simple math. How does that keep going on? So your predictions for what's going to happen in 2013 as far as the real estate market?
Well, I think in 2013, we have about another year and a half where I think actually real estate in certain markets, particularly rental, lower end rental properties, I think will outperform a lot of other markets. So I think they will do well. When we have this global reset, this financial calamity I'm talking about, all asset classes will suffer except gold and silver. But even those early on may decline until you start to get real rampant inflation. But I think 2013, 2014, the next president, Greg, will inherit this economic calamity that's coming. I have absolutely no doubt on it. In fact, I'm structuring my entire portfolio, all of my own personal money, around that global reset, that dollar reset that's coming, I believe, in the next presidential term.
Fabian Calvo, FabianForLiberty.com, also thenotehouse.us. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks for having me, Greg. I appreciate it.